The next season of Doctor Who is coming out next month, and I am so excited to see what's in store for fans this time. But until then, there are plenty of existing episodes of the show to enjoy and reflect on, and they might even contain some clues for what awaits next. My name is Ellie Blackwood. I'm a fantasy and science fiction writer in progress who talks entirely too much about Doctor Who. And today, I'm reviewing every Doctor Who episode since 2023, with and without spoilers. If you've followed me on TikTok before, you might know that I've been posting reviews of every Doctor Who episode that has aired for the last couple of years. And I figured that since the new season is coming up soon and the future of TikTok is looking a little shaky in the US, it would be a good time to revisit and re-edit all of those reviews for YouTube. This mammoth video will include my reviews for all the episodes of the show since Russell T Davies returned as showrunner. That is, all 3 60th anniversary specials with David Tennant's 14th Doctor, who shockingly returned when Jodie Whittaker's 13th Doctor regenerated into him, and all the episodes so far featuring Ncuti Gatwa as the 15th Doctor. I already have a video on my channel tackling Gatwa's first season, with my thoughts on the overarching themes of the season, the ways in which it succeeded, and the ways in which I think it could have been better. But this video will go deep into the nitty-gritty of each episode, with my thoughts on each one as it aired, and some of my theories for where the show might go in the future. It will also include my thoughts on the specials that I haven't discussed on YouTube yet, as well as some extra content about the current era of the show from my TikTok archives that felt relevant. The chapters in the description of this video will indicate where I start discussing each episode, including marking off the spoilery and spoiler-free sections. I loved discussing these episodes with everyone over on TikTok, and I'm thrilled to be able to discuss them here again. So be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments about any of these episodes, or about the show as a whole. If you like video essays about books, science fiction, Doctor Who, and all that goodness, be sure to subscribe to my channel. And if you want to make sure to keep up with all of my Doctor Who hot takes and other nerdy content, including getting access to my YouTube videos 3 days before anyone else, be sure to subscribe to my monthly newsletter, which you can find linked in the description. And now let's get on to the reviews, starting with 2023's The Star Beast. My initial review of the Doctor Who episode The Star Beast, both spoiler-free and spoilery. I'm going to give my initial spoiler-free thoughts and then give a warning when I'm about to start talking spoilers. First of all, the title sequence for this episode, absolutely fantastic. The theme music sounded great, and you can definitely tell they had a budget upgrade. The episode got right into it with plenty of exploration of Donna's new status quo and her family. Unfortunately, I feel like that kind of came at the expense of getting to know the 14th Doctor. But we've still got 2 more specials with this Doctor, and it's possible we'll get to know him a lot more in those. Donna was funny, sassy, and big-hearted as ever, and I had plenty of reminders about why she's my favourite Doctor Who companion. I also enjoyed getting to know Yaz Finney's Rose, and I really loved Yaz Finney in Heartstopper, so I was really excited to see her in this. A surprising highlight for me was seeing how Donna's mum Sylvia has grown and changed since we last saw her. In her previous appearances, Sylvia was really nasty to Donna, but she's grown into a much more caring and super protective mum and grandma. I also enjoyed getting to meet Donna's husband Sean properly. He seems like a great guy. The new sonic screwdriver is super cool, and it had some amazing features shown in this episode. And at the same time, I do worry that its even more powerful features might start being used for plot convenience. Sonic was already in danger of being used as a kind of deus ex machina, and I think this is probably going to make that risk worse. But only time will tell about that. The return of Unit was really cool, and I loved meeting new Unit scientific advisor Shirley Ann Bingham. I liked how she was happy to help the Doctor while also standing up to him sometimes, so I hope we see some more of her. Returning composer Murray Gold cooked up a super great score for this episode with plenty of callbacks to previous soundtracks. I noticed the new variation of the Doctor's theme from way back in the 9th Doctor's era, as well as I Am the Doctor, the 11th Doctor's theme, and also maybe The Shepherd's Boy, which is one of 12's themes. Also, highly predictably, I loved Beep the Meep, and I need a Beep the Meep plush toy right now. Overall, I really enjoyed this episode, and I am very excited to see what happens in the next episode, Wild Blue Yonder. We know very little about Wild Blue Yonder, and that makes me extra excited to see what they have in store. And now I'm going to get into spoiler territory, so please scroll away right now if you have not seen The Star Beast and you don't want to be spoiled. We have the new TARDIS interior, everybody! I was struck by how enormous this interior is, and I love that it can change colours. I was also very relieved to hear that Donna's granddad Wilf isn't dead. I know Bernard Cribbins filmed some footage for the 60th anniversary specials before he passed away, so I really hope they got what they needed so that he can actually make an appearance in a future special. I loved that Rose inherited some of Donna's Time Lordness from the Metacrisis Crisis. But I did think them just being able to shed the Time Lordness because they wanted to was a little bit too easy. I would have liked to see the Meta Crisis cause more issues throughout all the specials, and even maybe for Donna and Rose to get to keep their Time Lordness to some extent. But maybe they'll have some lingering effects that will come back to bite them later. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'm excited to hear what you all thought of the episode. This is my initial review of the second 60th anniversary Doctor Who special, Wild Blue Yonder. We didn't know much about this episode going into it, and as such there's not really a ton I can say without spoiling stuff, but I will say I really liked it. So if you haven't seen this episode and you want to go in completely without knowing what was going to happen like I did, you should probably scroll away right now. For those of you who are still here, let's get into it. If you've seen the episode, you'd know that Wild Blue Yonder has an out-of-control TARDIS land the Doctor and Donna on a mysterious spaceship at the edge of the universe. But they're not alone on this spaceship because there are two mysterious entities that are taking their shapes and chasing after them. The spaceship's architecture also shifts every so often, and there's a mysterious series of announcements and a really slow robot. Now here's the thing about me, I love mysteries set aboard spaceships, and I've always loved the sci-fi trope of some evil entity is taking the shape of someone you care about and trying to trick you into thinking it's them. This episode basically combined a bunch of sci-fi things that I love. I mentioned in my review of the Star Beast that I was a little bit concerned about the Doctor's new sonic screwdriver being too overpowered, so I was really pleased when the sonic screwdriver disappeared with the TARDIS at the start of the episode, because not only did that put the Doctor at a severe disadvantage, it also meant that he was on an equal footing with his duplicate. I thought the mentions of the Flux and the Timeless Child were done really well. The Doctor's conversation with fake Donna about those things showed just how much they're still affecting him, and also kind of tied up the plot point from the end of Flux where we weren't entirely sure what happened to the half of the universe that got destroyed by the Flux. Yeah, it's destroyed, and the Doctor is traumatized by it. Also, casual bisexual Doctor confirmation. It's not like we didn't already know, but it's there now. This episode was very effects heavy, and honestly we're starting to see the limits of even the new bigger budget for the show, but I didn't care about that. I've seen way too much crappy early 2000s CGI in this show to be offended by the fire spurting out of the TARDIS looking a little bit janky. Based on how secretive the marketing has been for this episode, I was honestly kind of expecting maybe other Doctors or other companions to show up, or for the evil entities to try and take their shapes just so we could get a cameo. But honestly, this episode hangs together so well and was so intriguing and riveting for me that I don't care that we didn't see any cameos. Except for Wilf at the end, oh my god, I almost cried! Overall, I enjoyed the Star Beast, but I enjoyed this one even more. And I'm super excited to see what I think of the final 60th anniversary special, The Giggle, next week. Here is my initial review of the third Doctor Who 60th anniversary special, The Giggle, both spoiler-free and spoilery. So I will give a warning when I'm about to start talking spoilers. This was a very fast-paced episode. I think all the 60th anniversary specials have been very fast-paced, but this one especially so. And sometimes that was really great and gripping, but there were a couple of places where I would have liked a little more time to process things. This new iteration of the Toymaker was absolutely brilliant. If you're the sort of person who absolutely thrives when the Master has a dance break, you are going to love this character. The Toymaker is a really interesting villain because he will always follow the rules. It's just that he's also super unpredictable and an absolute agent of chaos. And even though the Toymaker's only other on-screen appearance was in a First Doctor serial that we don't even have all the episodes for, I thought the Giggle did a really great job of setting up the previous history between the Doctor and the Toymaker. They really felt like two people with a history coming head to head again, and that made it all the more personal. I haven't actually seen any of the classic Who episodes with Mel, who travelled with the 6th and 7th Doctors yet, but I really liked her in this episode. I thought she was cool. And even though she's previously been on the show, I didn't feel lost as to what her role in her relationship with the Doctor is. I also loved seeing that she was working with UNIT and seemed to be killing it. Speaking of UNIT, I'm loving how increasingly high-tech they are, but I'm interested to see what the consequences of them being way more public than before are going to be. And of course I can't talk about this episode without talking about Shooty! Yes, as featured in the trailers, the 15th Doctor does indeed make an appearance in this episode, and he is fantastic. I'm not going to spoil how much screen time he has, but it was enough that I absolutely fell in love with Ncuti Gatwa as the Doctor. He's got absolute mounds of energy, optimism, and humour, and I cannot wait to see more of him in the Christmas special this year. Overall, in terms of the other two specials, I like The Giggle better than the Star Beast, but not quite as much as Wild Blue Yonder. Now I'm going to start talking spoilers, so if you haven't seen this episode yet and you don't want spoilers, go ahead and scroll away right now. So even though I think there's going to be very little continuity going into the next season, there is definitely some kind of big bad being set up for Shutigawa to fight. The Toymaker mentions the one who waits that even he was scared to play a game with. And you might remember way back in the Star Beast that Beep the Meat mentioned telling the boss about something. Something tells me this one who waits might have something to do with the upcoming season. Speaking of upcoming baddies, apparently the Toymaker trapped the Master in his gold tooth. But then at the end of the episode, the gold tooth fell out and someone picked it up. Who could it be? We don't know. But maybe this means the Master is coming back soon? I figured it's worth mentioning just how much of a boss Donna is in this episode. Between her defeating the Toymaker's puppets and negotiating an amazing salary and benefits package with Unit, she is such a queen. Honestly, I really liked the reason that we found out 14's face came back. It wasn't an evil plot by the Toymaker, it wasn't a trick, it was just his body telling him to slow down. I think the Doctor finally getting the message that they need some Time Lord rehab meshes really well with the Doctor's character arc up to this point. That poor sap is so traumatized. Now let's talk about that bi-generation thing, shall we? Yes, we have the new 15th Doctor, but somehow we still also have the 14th Doctor because they split like a bacterium. And the TARDIS also duplicated itself, so they both have a TARDIS. And 14 is now living the domestic life with Donna and her family, while the 15th Doctor goes off to explore the universe. If I had a nickel for every time a Doctor played by David Tennant split off into another version of himself and went to live with one of his former companions, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right? I have mixed feelings about it, but I think I would be more mad if 14 wasn't very much homebound for now. Bro is in Time Lord timeout. They have a comment about 15 technically being older than 14, so I'm not sure if the idea is that eventually 14 will regenerate into 15 or just kind of vanish or something. But I think it's really sweet that he now has a family, and based off the fact that he called Sean his brother-in-law and Rose his niece, he's basically styling himself as Donna's brother. It's a similar kind of character beat to Time of the Doctor, where the Doctor is staying in one place for an extended period of time and building up relationships with the people around him. However, this time he doesn't have to fight off any monsters, he can just chill. Even if he does occasionally sneak away in the TARDIS to take Rose to Mars or take Mel to New York or something. I'm wondering if this is intended to leave the door open for a possible 14th Doctor spin-off, maybe a more domestic version than the main show. Though of course again Donna has her sick new job with Unit, so I'm sure she'll be battling some things occasionally. Overall, maybe one piece of the logic behind the bi-regeneration was to have a cleaner reset for the next season. Based on the fact that 15's first season is going to be called Season 1, I don't think it's a secret that they're trying to make it very accessible to new viewers. This basically means that 15 doesn't have the loose ends of Donna and her family and Unit to tie up because 14's taking care of them right there. But I would have really liked to see 15 have your classic Doctor Who post-regeneration identity crisis, and we didn't really get that here because of the bi-regeneration. But maybe the upcoming Christmas special is going to be more of a traditional post-regeneration story. I expect people are going to have a very wide range of opinions about what happened in this episode, so please sound off in the comments with your thoughts. Here is my review of the 2023 Doctor Who Christmas special, The Church on Ruby Road, both spoiler-free and spoilery. So I will give a warning when I'm about to start talking spoilers. I really do think that this episode is a good jumping on point for new viewers, so if you're new to Doctor Who and you don't really feel like catching up with all of the previous episodes, this could be a good one to start with. I didn't need any more selling on Ncuti Gatwa as the Doctor, but oh my goodness, he was amazing in this. Gatwa really got to show off his broad and dynamic range. Some scenes were silly, goofy, haha funny Doctor, and some scenes were lonely, sad, devastated Doctor. I don't think there's really any doubt at this point that the 15th Doctor is going to be one of the most top-tier incarnations. I thought this was also a lovely introduction to the new companion Ruby Sunday as played by Millie Gibson. She's introduced as someone who's optimistic, easygoing, and curious, and I really like that about her. Similar to previous companions written by Russell T Davies, we also get quite a heavy focus on Ruby's family. And I really loved meeting her mum Carla and her grandmother Cherry. 15 and Ruby really have some instant chemistry, and I get the feeling that their dynamic is going to be quite affectionate. But based on how they both described it in interviews, my guess is it's going to be strictly platonic, thank goodness. We already have a teaser trailer for Gatwa's first full season, which is being marketed as Season 1, and needless to say, I am super excited for everything that's to come. Now I'm about to start talking spoilers, so if you haven't seen The Church on Ruby Road and you don't want to be spoiled, I would recommend scrolling away right now. For those of you who are left, let's get into it. We were left with a couple of mysteries at the end of this episode, one of which is who are Ruby's biological parents? There's bound to be a ton of theories like, oh, she's Clara's daughter, or she's Rose Tyler Skylar's daughter or something like that. But given how much this era seems like it's going for a fresh start, I would be surprised if Ruby's parents were somebody we already know. That said, I am very interested in what's going to be revealed. Also, who is Ruby's neighbor Mrs. Flood? Why does she know what a TARDIS is? I know people are going to be coming up with theories like, oh, it's River, it's Susan, it's the Ronnie, it's the Master. And I think on balance she's probably more likely to be someone we've seen before than Ruby's parents are. But I also wouldn't be surprised if she's a completely new character and just happens to be a new villain or a new Time Lord or something. I thought the goblins were really interesting villains, and I was intrigued by how they use luck and coincidence to achieve their goals. Their goals being eating people. In previous times when Doctor Who's had some kind of mythical creature like a werewolf or a vampire or something show up, it's always been shown that they were really aliens. No, that's not a werewolf, that's just more of a lupine wavelength Hemavaria form. But we didn't get that for these goblins, they are just kind of fantasy creatures that are showing up in Doctor Who. And Doctor Who's always kind of been fantasy disguised as sci-fi, but it's interesting to see them remove any pretense this time. I think this could be a really interesting way of having the Doctor explore new magic systems like he did in this episode, trying to navigate coincidence to defeat the goblins. I have to say, despite having it stuck in my head for the last 2 weeks, I have mixed feelings about the inclusion of the goblin song, but I do love that the Doctor and Ruby got to sing, that was really fun. Also, they kept the Mavesy joke, I love it, I love it. The new season of Doctor Who is finally here, so here's my review of episode 1, Space Babies, both spoiler-free and spoilery. So I will give a warning when I'm about to start talking spoilers. Space Babies sees the Doctor and Ruby Sunday on their first ever adventure away from home, where they find a spaceship seemingly run by highly intelligent babies. But there's a monster in the basement. This episode definitely cements the 15th Doctor's run as a good jumping on point for new viewers. All the important information about the show is explained again, and any continuity from the Doctor's previous adventures is easy to understand without having actually seen those episodes. Space Babies feels like a spiritual successor to The End of the World from Series 1, with Ruby getting a full introduction to travelling with the Doctor just like Rose did with the 9th Doctor in that episode. Even the scene of the Doctor and Ruby looking down on the planet from the spaceship's observation deck looks very similar to the scene from The End of the World where the Doctor and Rose look down on the Earth. Actually, I noticed a lot of things in Space Babies that really reminded me of previous episodes of Doctor Who, which will become apparent throughout this video. We also have it fully cemented that Gallifrey is gone again, and the loneliness that the 15th Doctor feels around this is a core part of his character. The pace of Space Babies is similarly fast to the 60th anniversary specials, which could be a little too quick for some viewers. Luckily, the characters didn't suffer for it because there was some really great character work folded into the action. Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson were dazzling as always, and I loved their characters' affectionate friendship. Gatwa is great at balancing the Doctor's fun energy with the deep sense of loneliness he feels, and him trying to cover up how sad he really is about it hit me right in the gut. On a slightly less complimentary note, because the episode is about Space Babies, I guess I was expecting it to have some level of juvenile humor, but this episode contains rather a lot of toilet humor even for Doctor Who. And I have a pretty high tolerance for silly Doctor Who episodes. I'm one of those weirdos who absolutely loves the season 2 episode New Earth with the cat nuns and an evil trampoline taking over the Doctor and Rose's brains, but I think Space Babies just wasn't tongue-in-cheek enough to justify all that silly stuff in the way that New Earth was. But all that said, I really like the stuff that Space Babies sets up outside of the main plot of the episode. Even though the main plot itself was a bit pants, I think the setups bode very well for the season to come. We'll be talking spoilers now, so scroll away if you don't want spoilers for this episode. Now let's talk about the babies. One thing that was a bit disconcerting about the babies is that as a result of them being highly intelligent, they do talk, and the animation on their mouths feels a bit uncanny valley because the actors who were playing the babies were at least mildly upset most of the time. So sometimes the expression in their eyes did not match their mouths at all. Like, there's not very much you can do to convince me that your baby character is feeling whatever emotion you want them to feel if their eyes are just always looking like this. Golda Rosheuvel was pretty great in this episode, but I would expect nothing less from Queen Charlotte herself. I also enjoyed that Ruby makes a comment that was pretty pointedly criticising the anti-abortion movement of today. So, the planet down below refused to stop the babies being born, but once they're born, they don't look after them. Kill the Moon is quaking. If you know, you know. The design for the bogeyman, the monster in the basement of the spaceship, was actually pretty great. It was like if Prisoner Zero from the 11th Doctor's debut episode had actually good animation. But excuse me, it was made of snot? I know it's a pun on bogies, but the word bogeyman comes from the Middle English word for frightening spectre, not bogies. I just have to assume the ship computer misunderstood. In any case, I think my tolerance for the snot monster was bolstered by the sleepy dust monsters in that Series 9 episode Sleep No More that everyone tries to forget. The fact that the ship's computer misguidedly created the bogeyman for the children kind of reminds me of how the clockwork robots in the Series 2 episode The Girl in the Fireplace misguidedly repaired their ship with human body parts, which is something I kind of dig. I like rogue computers. I also like how the Doctor ends up saving the bogeyman. The theme is introduced early on of not calling calling something a monster just because you don't recognize it or it looks scary to you, but also the Doctor has a new perspective and care for outcasts after he found out he was the timeless child. He resonates with the bogeyman being the only one of its kind and feels motivated to protect it. This isn't entirely new though, because it's pretty much the same reason why the 11th Doctor felt so drawn to helping the star whale in the series 5 episode The Beast Below. Something I didn't really understand is why the babies were so against throwing the bogeyman out of the airlock when they'd spent the entire episode being deathly scared of it. Maybe it would have just been too dark to see a bunch of babies cheering for the death of a creature who, at the end of the day, was totally innocent. I also can't decide if it's hilarious or awful that the way that the Doctor gets the ship moving at the end is by blasting a bunch of methane out of the compartment that contains the baby's used diapers. The spaceship was powered by farts! Though it did kind of remind me of my favorite book series as a kid, which is called Astrosaurs, and it was about these spacefaring dinosaurs that fly around in spaceships powered by dung. So in a way, the farting spaceship was kind of nostalgic for me. Saying that sentence was not on my 2024 bingo card. I like the memory of the night when Ruby was abandoned as a baby bleeding through with the snow on the ship. I kind of think it might be a hint that later on in the season the Doctor and Ruby are going to go change what happened in the past, and their memories are kind of changing to catch up. Overall, it seems like there might be more serious consequences from mucking around with time in this season. In the first instance, there was that scene toward the beginning of the episode where Ruby stepped on a butterfly in the past and briefly turned into a reptile person until the Doctor revived the butterfly. But the Doctor also gives a very pointed warning about how Ruby can never return to that night when she was abandoned at the church as a baby. It reminded me a lot of Father's Day from Series 1, where the 9th Doctor is very adamant that Rose absolutely under no circumstances can go visit her dad in the past. Bet you anything that the Doctor and Ruby are going to end up at that church the night of her abandonment. I'm also wondering if the Doctor already has any theories for what's going on with Ruby, because we see him initiate a DNA scan of her at the end of the episode. Overall, the things I liked most about this episode were less the actual plot and more the expectations it sets up about what's to come. So what were your thoughts on Space Babies? The first 2 episodes of the new season of Doctor Who are officially here. So here is my review of episode 2, The Devil's Chord, both spoiler-free and spoilery. So I will give a warning when I'm about to start talking spoilers. The Devil's Chord sees the Doctor and Ruby Sunday travelling back to 1963 in hopes of meeting the Beatles, but they end up having to battle the evil Maestro to restore music to the world. If you watched my review of episode 1, Space Babies, you'd know that I have mixed feelings about that episode. But The Devil's Chord had everything I love about Space Babies combined with a better plot and a cracking villain. This episode has a bit more continuity in it from previous stories than Space Babies did, but it delivered it in a way that shouldn't confuse new viewers at all. Jinx Monsoon absolutely rocked it as Maestro, bringing both the fear factor and pizzazz. I am pleased to announce that Doctor Who, the show that made kids terrified of shadows, water, and statues, is making kids terrified of pianos now. The Devil's Chord feels joyfully over the top in a way that could be overwhelming for some viewers, but I had a great time. My biggest criticism, though, is that there appears to have been a time skip between Space Babies and this episode. The Doctor says, "So when is it for you back home? What time are you? June 2024? And Ruby responds, "It's hard to keep track, but yeah, I think so. June, July?" Given that the Doctor and Ruby met at Christmas, this line seems to imply that they've been travelling together for several months by this point. Either that, or the Doctor left Ruby at home for a few months and went travelling by himself for a bit. The line is a kind of blink and you'll miss it moment, but it feels quite jarring to me. Let me know in the comments if you noticed this time skip, because I'm interested to see how many people actually picked up on it. Given that we're only on the 15th Doctor's 3rd proper episode, it seems really weird to have a time skip this early in the season. And that, combined with how high the stakes get dialed in this episode, leads me to a theory. What if the Devil's Chord was originally supposed to come later in the season and they ended up moving it earlier? As far as I know, the writers haven't confirmed one way or another, but let me know what you think of this theory in the comments. I am going to be getting into spoilers now, so scroll away if you don't want spoilers for this episode. So with the revelation that Maestro is the child of the Toymaker and that they're both part of the Pantheon, it seems like the Pantheon are going to be the big bads for this era of the show. Maestro also warned about the One Who Waits, just like the Toymaker did in the episode The Giggle. I can only assume the One Who Waits is also somehow connected to the Pantheon. The Pantheon isn't totally new in Doctor Who lore. If you know who the Trickster is, that's another member of the Pantheon. Maestro also expresses some disbelief about an entity called the Oldest One being present on the night of Ruby's birth, which adds another layer of mystery surrounding the circumstances of Ruby's birth and abandonment. I thought the final battle with Maestro was kind of over the top, but overall I think the exaggerated silly chaos of it all worked. In my review of Space Babies, I mentioned that I thought the episode took itself too seriously to really make the silliness work, but this episode was campy enough to excuse the silliness while also delivering on some serious threats. Although, can we talk about how Maestro's weakness was literally just a C chord? I assume you had to play it with a certain amount of feeling in your heart or something, but the fact that the chord itself was so basic was really funny to me. Another interesting takeaway from this episode is that the bi-generation in the episode The Giggle appears to have left the Doctor vulnerable. The Giggle went to great lengths to portray 15 as this whole-hearty Doctor, but maybe that's not the full story, and it will be interesting to see how that develops. Adding on to this, it's rare in Doctor Who that you get to see the stakes of not defeating the villain so clearly as in this episode. I loved getting to see the destroyed version of future London, but also, like I said in the spoiler-free section, this feels like weirdly high stakes for only the second episode of the season. The episode setting in 1963 gives the Doctor the opportunity to have a pointed discussion about Susan, his granddaughter who he travelled with in his first incarnation. The Doctor apparently doesn't know where Susan is and assumes that she died in the Time War. I believe this is the first time where the Doctor has confirmed on screen the extent of his knowledge about Susan's fate, and the attention given to the question of where Susan is now has me clowning that she's actually going to show up in this season. It's possible that they might bring Susan's original actress back to play her, but there are actually a few other characters who I think could secretly be Susan. There is Ruby's neighbour, Mrs. Flood, who seemed to know what a TARDIS is in the episode The Church on Ruby Road. There is also a character played by the actress Susan Twist, who first appeared at the start of Wild Blue Yonder as Mrs. Merridew, but she's been making cameos as different people in every episode of the 15th Doctor's run since then. In The Devil's Chord, she plays a tea lady, so something is definitely up with her, and maybe it's Susan stalking the Doctor. And finally, there's also the possibility that Ruby herself is Susan with her memories wiped. There were a couple of pointed comments in Space Babies about coincidences drawing the Doctor and Ruby together, and maybe it's because they're actually related. I do think this last one is the least likely, but who knows? Let me know in the comments which theory you think is most likely. As a Doctor Who soundtrack nerd, I thought it was really interesting that Ruby plays her own theme on the piano. This makes her the second Doctor Who companion to have a theme that ends up being diegetic, which means the characters in the show can hear it. The first was Clara's theme, which the 12th Doctor played on his guitar in the episode Hellbent. So that in and of itself is a bit of a fourth wall break, but the fourth wall breaks just get even more insane from there. Of course, Maestro starts off the episode by breaking the fourth wall, but then the Doctor himself starts breaking the fourth wall, making this comment about the swelling music during an action scene. I thought that was non-diegetic. And at the end of the episode, he winks right at the camera before breaking into a heavily choreographed musical number. Breaking the fourth wall in Doctor Who isn't anything new. Who could forget when the 12th Doctor monologued directly into the camera about the bootstrap paradox during the cold open of the episode before the flood? But the 15th Doctor seems especially aware that he's in a TV show, and I'm not sure if it's building up to a wider point or if it's just going to be a running gag. For the moment, I'm not totally sure how to feel about it. Sound off in the comments about what you think. I found it interesting that Maestro's kid that acts as their harbinger actually quietly showed up at the end, which indicates that maybe Maestro will come back. Maybe that was the twist the ensemble was singing about. Overall, this was a pretty cool and enjoyable episode, and I'm really excited to watch the next one, Boom, in a week's time. So what did you think of The Devil's Chord? What is the Pantheon in Doctor Who? The new era of Doctor Who is now underway and is introducing some powerful new villains for the 15th Doctor to fight. The presence of these villains seemed to be a consequence of the 14th Doctor invoking a superstition at the end of the universe in the recent episode Wild Blue Yonder. Specifically, 14's actions have released a mysterious collection of villains known as the Pantheon. The Toymaker, who fought the 14th Doctor and forced him to regenerate, is one of these Pantheon members. And Maestro, the villain of the recent episode The Devil's Chord, is also a member of the Pantheon. Overall, these two villains have been an important part of Doctor Who's new direction as it leans more into fantasy rather than just sticking to sci-fi. Let me know in the comments how you've been liking this new fantastical direction so far. But the Pantheon might not be a totally new thing in Doctor Who. There's a group of villains known as the Pantheon of Discord that's already an established thing in Doctor Who. The Doctor Who spin-off show The Sarah Jane Adventures featured a villain known as the Trickster. The Trickster was kind of like a representative for the Pantheon of Discord, containing multitudes. The 10th Doctor described the Trickster, and by extension the Pantheon of Discord, as beings from beyond the universe trying to break through into our reality. Another member of the Pantheon of Discord appeared during an 11th Doctor era comic. Imaginary Enemies was a story featuring Krampus, a being who wanted to meddle in our reality and stop a young Amy and Rory from getting married in the future. Krampus came from beyond the universe and could be banished according to set rules, similar to what we've seen with the Toymaker and Maestro in recent episodes. Now, it's not clear at this point whether the Pantheon in the new series is meant to be the same thing as the Pantheon of Discord. In the Doctor Who Unleashed episode for The Devil's Chord, showrunner showrunner Russell T Davies was a bit cagey about the name of the Pantheon, also referring to it as the gods of chaos. Whether the Pantheon of Discord is the same thing as the modern Pantheon, they have very obvious commonalities. Both pantheons feature beings from beyond our universe who come into our reality and try to bend it to their will. So no matter what, we can expect some reality-bending shenanigans to come next in Doctor Who. In fact, in an interview with Cinema Blend, Russell T Davies said that we could expect to see 3 more members of the Pantheon. It's unclear whether these gods will show up in this season or a future one, but I for one am very much looking forward to them. Let me know your thoughts about the Pantheon and any theories for the future of the show in the comments. If you've watched any amount of Doctor Who, you've probably seen an episode written by Stephen Moffat. A celebrated writer throughout the 9th and 10th Doctor's eras and the showrunner during the 11th and 12th Doctor's eras, Moffat has written more episodes of modern Doctor Who than anyone else. He is responsible for such lauded episodes of the show as The Girl in the Fireplace, Blink, Silence in the Library, The Empty Child, and Heaven Sent. And now he's back to guest write the 3rd episode in the new season of Doctor Who, which is titled simply Boom. And here is what I thought of Boom, both spoiler-free and spoilery. So I'll give a warning when I'm about to start talking spoilers. The concept of Boom is a simple one. When the 15th Doctor and Ruby Sunday visit the war-torn planet of Casterion 3, the Doctor accidentally steps on a futuristic landmine, and now he cannot move, otherwise he'll get blown up. This episode represents a return to more traditional Doctor Who stories than the last couple of episodes. Episode 1, Space Babies, and Episode 2, The Devil's Chord, were both a bit on the silly side. Overall, I thought The Devil's Chord handled the wackiness better than Space Babies did, but I was still hoping for something more grounded in this 3rd episode. And it certainly delivered. This is very much a science fiction episode with very little hint of the fantasy elements that have started being woven into the show. I think it's just what was needed to balance out how over the top the season has been so far. But that doesn't mean it was boring. This episode was stressful as hell. Ncuti Gatwa brought some incredible acting to this episode. Gatwa is usually a very physical, lively actor, but because he was standing in one place for most of the episode, he had to rely more on facial expressions and more subtle gestures. And he was fabulous. The Doctor's relationship with Ruby also shone this episode, with them having some disagreements about how to get out of this situation. While I have been enjoying the Doctor and Ruby's friendship so far, I love it when the companion clashes with the Doctor, so I liked seeing a little bit more tension there, even just temporarily. The episode takes place mostly in the same location, making it feel a little claustrophobic, which in some ways helps and in some ways hinders the episode. On the one hand, the single location allows for a heavy focus on character dynamics, which I think was done quite well. But toward the end, there were a few different conversations and character moments going on at once, and with a confined setting like this, it's easy for things to start to feel overstuffed. And while I loved how basically everything that could possibly go wrong did go wrong, everything got so horrible by the end that the resolution felt like a bit of a Deus Ex Machina to me. Also, a bit of a nitpick, but given the 6-month time skip in the last episode, it's a bit jarring to me that this episode firmly states that this is Ruby Sunday's first time on an alien planet. You're telling me that she's been traveling with the Doctor for 6 months and they've never been to an alien planet yet? This just adds to my theory that the Devil's Chord was supposed to come later in the season and they ended up moving it back to be the 2nd episode. Overall, Boom isn't Stephen Moffat's best Doctor Who episode, but that was always going to be a high bar to clear. And I would still give it a solid thumbs up as probably my favourite episode of the 15th Doctor's era so far. And now I'm going to get into spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, hit that favourites button, come back later when you've seen Boom. For the rest of you, let's get into it. So a few weeks ago, it was announced that Varda Sethu, who is probably best known for playing Cinta in Andor, is going to be a companion in the next season of Doctor Who. Well, imagine my surprise when she appeared as an Anglican Marine in this episode. Her name is Mundy Flynn, and it remains to be seen whether the Doctor is going to be travelling with this exact character, or if it's going to be more of a Clara Oswald situation where you meet a character played by the same actor who then turns out to be related in some way to the eventual companion. If the Doctor does end up travelling with Mundy, it would be really cool to have a regular companion from the future, which I don't think we've had in modern Doctor Who yet. I think the closest we've had are Adam Mitchell and Captain Jack Harkness, but both of those were more guest companions. Speaking of recurring characters, the actress Susan Twist has been making cameos in every 15th Doctor episode so far, playing different characters. And this episode has perhaps her most prominent appearance yet, playing the creepy AI ambulance lady. Still don't know what's up with her, we will see. Theme-wise, Boom has an anti-capitalist message similar to Oxygen from the 12th Doctor's era. In both cases, you have a technology company, in Boom's case a weapons manufacturer, doing everything they can to maximize profit even at the expense of human life. The engineered pointless war also felt similar to what happens in The Doctor's Daughter from the 10th Doctor's run. Though in Boom's case the war was caused not by a misunderstanding, but by the Villengard Corporation purposely manipulating the Marines to think they were fighting some unseen enemy when there was really nothing there. Also, they could keep selling the Marines weapons to blow themselves up with. Themes of religion also felt familiar for Doctor Who because this is far from the first time the show has tackled religion. The Anglican Marines actually showed up in the 11th Doctor's run in the episode A Good Man Goes to War, and there was also a similar church-based army in the episode Time of Angels. Not to mention that episodes like The Impossible Planet and Gridlock from the 10th Doctor's era and the God Complex from the 11th Doctor's era deal quite squarely with the concept of faith. Boom fits very neatly into this tradition. Toward the middle of the episode, there is a line that initially felt a bit uncomfortably anti-religion to me. Most armies would notice they were fighting smoke and shadows, but not this lot, Ruby. You know why? 'Cause they have faith. The magic word that keeps you never having to think for yourself. To be clear, I have no problem with the Doctor saying that he doesn't believe in a god. I just find it really annoying when people act like they're superior to people of faith for not believing in a god. Like when it gets into the territory of how could you possibly be so stupid as to believe in fake magic sky daddy. But for me, the ending scene saved this, with the Doctor admitting that he does need faith sometimes even if it's not an explicitly religious one. I think taken all together, Boom was a pretty nuanced portrayal of the purpose that religious faith serves. At worst, it can be used to harm others, like the Anglican Marines using it as a way to wage war and deny care to others. But at best, it can be a profound source of hope and wonder. The one place where I thought the theme of religion was handled poorly was in the case of the child character Splice. Yes, Splice believes that dead people go to heaven, but I think it's used as kind of an excuse for her to not freak the hell out over her dad's death. And there were also so many more things that she inexplicably wasn't freaking out at, like the fact that the Doctor was standing on a giant bomb and crying. Overall, I kind of wish Splice hadn't been there. She was a little distracting in an already very overstuffed third act and seemed to be there just to say convenient things for the plot. While this episode was quite self-contained, we did get some hints at the overarching plot, with snow starting to fall as the ambulance was trying to determine Ruby's next of kin. These hints are doing a great job of tantalizing me so far, and I'm going to be interested to see what other hints we might get in the episode 73 Yards next week. So what did you think of Boom? Do you agree with any of my thoughts, or do you have a different take? Let me know in the comments. The latest Doctor Who episode, 73 Yards, is unlike anything the show has ever done before. And here is my review, an explanation, and some theorizing, both spoiler-free and spoilery. So I will give a warning when I'm about to start talking spoilers. I think this is an episode that's most enjoyable when you go in with very little idea of what's going to happen. So I won't say any specifics until I get to the spoilery section. I will say that if you forgot Russell T Davies' Welsh, this episode will remind you of that very heavily. On a more serious note, this episode gave me serious Black Mirror vibes. This was a risk for Doctor Who, and I think it paid off. Was it perhaps a little heavy for the 4th episode of a new season? Maybe. But given that this season only has 8 episodes, we really do have to be getting into the meat of it now. Millie Gibson has been doing a great job this season, but she absolutely shines as Ruby Sunday in this episode. Her acting makes the story a whole other level of impactful. Overall, I can't decide whether 73 Yards or Boom is my favorite episode of the season, but both of them are up there. I feel like the season is definitely finding its feet after a bit of a shaky start in Space Babies. And now I'm going to get into spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, hit that favorites button and come back when you've seen 73 Yards. For the rest of you, let's get into it. What in the wibbly wobbly timey wimey was that? I have a lot of thoughts about 73 Yards, including a theory that I think explains what the hell happened, which I'll get to in just a second. But for the sake of keeping all the events straight, I will begin with a brief recap of what happened in this episode. The Doctor and Ruby arrive on a clifftop in Wales where they encounter a collection of string on the ground that is later in the episode referred to as a fairy circle. It has a bunch of little trinkets and messages tied to it, including a scroll that says "Rest in peace, Mad Jack." And when the Doctor accidentally steps on the fairy circle, he disappears. From that point on, Ruby begins to be followed by an old woman from exactly 73 yards away. This will continue throughout Ruby's whole life, with anyone who tries to confront the woman screaming and running away and never speaking to Ruby again. This includes everyone from a random pubgoer to Ruby's mum to Unit. Oh yeah, Kate Stewart is in this episode briefly before the woman scares her away. That was nice to see her back. Eventually, Ruby just accepts the woman's presence. Then, many years in the future, Ruby realizes that a new Prime Minister candidate, Roger Ap Gwilliam, used to be nicknamed Mad Jack. The Doctor had previously mentioned to Ruby that Roger Ap Gwilliam is the worst Prime Minister in Britain's history and brings the country to the brink of nuclear war. So Ruby volunteers for Ap Gwilliam's campaign to keep an eye on him. Once he wins the election and Ruby is absolutely sure that he is going to pull some nuclear tomfoolery, she steps exactly 73 yards away, forcing him to encounter the woman. After which Ap Gwilliam freaks out, runs away, and resigns from being Prime Minister. Ruby continues aging and living her life with the woman always 73 yards away from her. But when Ruby is on her deathbed, the woman finally approaches. And that's when we realize that the woman is actually Ruby right before her death, caught in a time loop attached to her younger self. So at the end of the episode, we loop back around to the beginning, and Ruby's older self influences the Doctor not to step on the fairy circle after all. So the fairy circle is unbroken, Mad Jack rests in peace, and the Doctor is fine. And the woman isn't following Ruby anymore, but Ruby senses an echo of that aborted timeline still in her memory. So this is a super timey-wimey conundrum, and it's a bit difficult to unravel. The episode was riveting to watch as it unfolded. I personally loved it, but I think the conclusion risks some viewers being more confused than satisfied. It's very hard to pull off an episode where most of the plot gets erased at the end, but I appreciate that this was something different that took risks. At various points, it reminded me of Midnight and Turn Left from the 10th Doctor's era, as well as Under the Lake and Before the Flood from the 12th Doctor's era, but overall it felt very fresh and exciting. Now, here is my theory that I think explains what the hell happened in 73 Yards. In keeping with the new era's fantasy elements, it can't be explained without a bit of magic. I think this episode makes the most sense if you think of the fairy circle itself as a character. When the Doctor steps on the fairy circle, he disappears, and now Mad Jack isn't bound anymore, which was the whole point of the fairy circle. So the fairy circle used the only resource it had to fix itself and restrain Mad Jack, Ruby. The circle conjured a ghost of Ruby from the moment of her death to follow her throughout her life. That gave Ruby the means to defeat Mad Jack, aka Roger Ap Gwilliam, in this timeline. And to avoid the circle's plan being ruined, anyone who tried to confront the ghost of old Ruby would run away. And then when this version of Ruby lives out her whole life and her ghost loops back around to the moment when the Doctor stepped on the fairy circle, she's there in time to warn her younger self to tell the Doctor not to step on the fairy circle. So the Doctor doesn't break the circle and everything is fixed. The start of the episode is shot very deliberately, so you can't see whether or not the woman was there before the Doctor disappears. And I don't think she was. So did you buy my explanation for all this, or do you have a different theory? Was this episode up there with the greats, or did it not quite stick the landing for you? Let me know all of your opinions about 73 Yards in the comments. The latest Doctor Who episode, Dot and Bubble, is a twisted conundrum of a story. And here is my review and an explanation, both spoiler-free and spoilery. So I will give a warning when I'm about to start talking spoilers. Instead of following the Doctor and his companion Ruby Sunday, this episode largely revolves around a new character called Lindy Pepper Bean. Lindy is a resident of a futuristic community called Fine Time, where everybody lives in blissful virtual reality social media bubbles. But when slug-like monsters start attacking the residents of Fine Time, the Doctor and Ruby pop up in Lindy's bubble to help her escape. Just like last week's episode 73 Yards, this episode definitely felt reminiscent of Black Mirror to me. The aesthetics are pretty similar to the Black Mirror episode Nosedive, and it's heightened by the fact that Lindy takes on a sort of one-off main character role, which is usually what happens in Black Mirror. One-off main characters in Doctor Who aren't totally new, with probably the most famous example being Sally Sparrow from the Series 3 episode Blink. But unlike Sally Sparrow, Lindy isn't exactly your straightforward kind of hero. While the narrative choice to center a story around a guest main character was pretty interesting, given that last week's episode largely revolved around Ruby Sunday, I'm dying for more episodes that more heavily feature the Doctor. I'm really hoping the rest of the episodes in this season will remedy that. I do love that Doctor Who is taking risks and making some more unorthodox narrative choices this season, but can we at least have some unorthodox episodes focused on the Doctor, please? Suffice to say, in the capacity that he does appear in this episode, Ncuti Gatwa continues to be amazing as the Doctor. I was a little worried that this episode would veer into a message that just boils down to kids these days are on their phone too much. But while I don't think it entirely avoided that message, it did end up going in a direction that was a bit more unexpected. I'll get into more detail of all the themes this episode deals with in the spoiler section, but I do believe it's important to warn people when heavy topics are going to come up in a piece of media, because that helps people mentally prepare to experience the story without being blindsided by something distressing. So if you haven't seen Dot and Bubble yet, be advised that it does deal with racism. Overall, I think my favourite episode of this season still remains a tie between 73 Yards and Boom, but despite some clunky plot resolutions that I'll deal with in the spoiler section, Dot and Bubble was pretty good, and it's certainly an episode I'll be thinking about for a while. And now I'm going to start talking spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, hit that favorites button and come back when you've seen Dot and Bubble. Well, I assumed the show would have to deal with racism against the Doctor at some point, but I assumed it would probably come during an episode set in the past, not in an episode set in the future. The Society of Fine Time is shown to be a bubble of rich young adults whose parents have sent them to this idyllic community where they only have to work 2 hours a day and party the rest of the time. Incidentally, Lindy's mum is played by Susan Twist, who has been appearing in every episode this season in a different cameo role, and this time the Doctor and Ruby both recognized her. So that's an interesting development, but suffice to say, for the purposes of this episode, she is Lindy's doting mum who has sent her to the utopian community of Fine Time. But it's revealed at the end that there is another component for who gets to live in Fine Time. You have to be young, you have to be rich, and you have to be white. These people are so racist that their idea of paradise is one without any people of color. And obviously, since the Doctor is black, the people of Fine Time shun his efforts to help them. It's heavily implied that the only reason why Lindy listens to the Doctor and Ruby's efforts to help her is that Ruby is white. There were quite a lot of small hints throughout the episode that Findtime was a white supremacist community, such as the fact that all the residents of Findtime that we see on screen are white, and that when Lindy is dismissing the Doctor and Ruby, she seems to disparage the Doctor more than she disparages Ruby. She outright blocks the Doctor the first time she sees him pop up, but she's more willing to hear Ruby out. There's also a moment where she realizes that the Doctor and Ruby are in the same room as they're talking to her, and she seems weirded out by that. And when I first saw that scene, I assumed it was because she was weirded out at the idea of people interacting face to face, given that she lives in a community of bubbles. But it's actually because the Doctor is black and Ruby is white. At the end of the episode, one of the Findtime residents calling himself the leader talks about how they're going to escape the slug monsters by spreading out to the rest of the planet. And he talks about being pioneers, owning and conquering the planet like their ancestors did. I felt like this language was purposely meant to recall American colonists driving indigenous people off their lands and murdering them in the name of progress. The most gut-wrenching part of it all is the Doctor's pain when the people of Findtime refuse to come in the TARDIS with him. The pain of experiencing racism from the Findtime residents is compounded by the fact that he knows they will die if they strike out on their own. And because he's the Doctor, he desperately wants to save them even though they're profoundly bigoted against him. Even though Gatwa appears on a screen for most of this episode and is only present in the flesh for a couple of minutes, he makes every second of this last couple of minutes hit right in the gut. All throughout the episode, I was trying to work out what this story was trying to say, and for a while I thought it was making a point about how social media can ironically make us isolated from each other. And there might still be a layer of that, but it turns out the ultimate point is the isolating nature of white supremacy. While I have to commend the episode for dealing with some meaty themes, I did feel like it failed to resolve some important plot elements. Namely, what's the deal with the slug monsters? The Doctor states that the dots that control the Findtime residents' social media bubbles have gained sentience, and they're so sick of the Findtime residents' shallowness that they're trying to kill them, which is not necessarily the first thought that I would have. I'd first assumed that someone else engineered the slugs and was controlling the dots to make the Findtime residents walk into them, rather than the dots themselves being sentient AI and having cooked up this plan all on their own. But the Doctor's assertion is never challenged, so I guess that is really what was going on. Yes, the dots also let the slug creatures inside the dome, or maybe they engineered them inside the dome so they didn't have to break in the first place. But it's shown on a screen that the homeworld where the Findtime residents' parents and everyone else lives has also been devastated and overrun by the slugs. So I guess people on the homeworld also have the dots and bubbles, and the dots did the same plan on the homeworld as well. I just feel like a little more explanation of all of that would have made the plot much more satisfying for me. So what did you think about Dot and Bubble? Let me know in the comments. The latest Doctor Who episode, Rogue, is deceptively simple, but it might have just changed the show forever. And here is my review, both spoiler-free and spoilery, so I will give a warning when I'm about to start talking spoilers. Rogue sees the Doctor and his companion Ruby Sunday taking a trip to Regency, England, where they're excited for a fun time of balls and gossip. But instead they find themselves up against an alien threat, as well as a mysterious stranger called Rogue. This is very much a standard formula Doctor Who episode in a way that we haven't seen much of this season. Don't get me wrong, I've been loving some of the new twisty episode structures, but it's nice to have a bit of a return to normalcy before the finale hits. Obviously, I'm watching this episode because I love Doctor Who first and foremost, but as someone who's also been eagerly awaiting the second part of Bridgerton Season 3, it was fun to have a little Regency morsel to tide me over. And indeed, there are a few nods to Bridgerton in the actual episode. At first, I wasn't quite sure how to feel about all the Bridgerton references, but then I remembered that Doctor Who did do an episode about Big Brother and the Weakest Link in 2005, so it's not really unusual for the show to mention the pop culture of the time. In my review of Dot and Bubble last week, I mentioned that I'm hungry for episodes that spend more time with the Doctor. And this episode gave me what I wanted, with perhaps the deepest dive we've seen into the 15th Doctor's character all season. Ncuti Gatwa gets plenty of opportunity to be a fun, energetic Doctor. There's a part where he sings Pure Imagination from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which is really funny because Gatwa has talked about how he told his agents he wanted to play a character like Willy Wonka or the Doctor, and that's why they submitted him for consideration for the part of the Doctor, so now he's sort of played both of them. As for this episode's eponymous guest character, I really enjoyed Rogue as played by Jonathan Groff. I'll say more about Rogue in the spoilers section, but I do think it's really funny that having a character with an American accent on Doctor Who is almost always code for this character is kind of sketch. I mean, hey, there's a trend in American movies where characters with British accents are exponentially more likely to be evil, so I think Doctor Who's just getting some payback. I'm British American, so I guess I'm just doubly evil. Anyway, while this was a really fun episode with a lot of heart, I had the same issue with it that I had with a lot of other episodes this season, and it's that I wanted it to be longer. sure. There's so much to love in this season of Doctor Who, but I feel like it all just needs a little more time to breathe. With only 2 more episodes to go, this season is feeling like a whirlwind that leaves me wanting more in a not totally satisfying way. I'm still really excited to find out how this season is going to conclude, but I really hope the writing for the next season takes some of these shortcomings into account. And now I'm going to start talking spoilers, so if you haven't seen Rogue, hit that favorites button and come back when you've seen the episode. Y'all, this episode didn't have much continuity in it, but man, it had some lore implications. There's a scene where Rogue's ship is scanning the Doctor and it pops up with a hologram of a bunch of different incarnations. We get Joe Martin's fugitive Doctor in there, so that's nice. But the big twist is that we also get Richard E. Grant's face. In 2003, Richard E. Grant played the 9th Doctor in an animated series called Scream of the Shalka to celebrate Doctor Who's 40th anniversary. Scream of the Shalka has long been considered non-canon, and when the main TV show revived in 2005, Christopher Eccleston was cast as the 9th Doctor. But including Richard E. Grant's face in that sequence implies that the Shalka Doctor is at least semi-canon now. I think his inclusion is a nod to how the Toymaker bragged about making a jigsaw puzzle of the Doctor's history in the episode The Giggle. Aside from that lore bombshell, there isn't much continuity in this episode, though the actress Susan Twist did make a brief appearance, this time in painting form as the late Duke's mother. Susan Twist has of course been making a cameo as a different character in each episode of this season, and the Doctor and Ruby are starting to notice. Based on the Next Time trailer, it seems like we'll be finding out what the deal is with Susan Twist in the next episode. In other big news, we also have the Doctor's first ever on-screen romance with a man, unless you count Captain Jack Harkness, I guess. While the Doctor and Rogue had great chemistry, I did feel like their relationship was a bit rushed. Don't get me wrong, I totally bought their first meeting where they started flirting a little bit. But in the scene where the Doctor invites Rogue to travel with him, which is a huge escalation, I couldn't stop thinking, babes, you met him 10 minutes ago. But I did love how they bonded over the fact that they've both lost long-term partners. It made total sense that Rogue sacrificed himself to save Ruby in the end because he knows how much she means to the Doctor. She's basically the only person the Doctor has left. The death fake out with Ruby had me quaking, by the way. That was so good. Part of me thinks Rogue has to come back somehow given that his last words were asking the Doctor to find him, but it's probably also very expensive to get Jonathan Groff as a guest actor, and I'm not sure they have that much money. We still know next to nothing about Rogue, including his real name, so there's real potential to do more with that character. Maybe they'll put him in some Big Finish stories with an actor who can do a semi-decent Jonathan Groff impression. Perhaps the crowning jewel of this episode is how it engages with the Doctor's flaws, but it was very nearly a miss for me. The Doctor's plan for stopping the shape-shifting bird-like aliens, the Cholder, is to send them to a barren dimension, which he thinks is more humane than killing them. But I think we can all agree that being trapped in a barren dimension is pretty awful, and it reminded me a bit too much of a tendency from the 13th Doctor's run that I really didn't like. The 13th Doctor would sometimes do extremely inhumane things to defeat her enemies that wasn't technically killing them, and there was never even any kind of moral debate about it among her companions. Everyone just took the Doctor's opinion as automatically the most ethical one. The most egregious example, I think, was in the episode Arachnids in the UK, where instead of shooting a giant spider that was dying anyway with a gun to put it out of its misery, the 13th Doctor instead trapped it in a room to slowly starve and suffocate. But what stops Rogue from falling into that same trap for me is a comment that the Doctor makes after he thinks a Cholder has killed Ruby. The Doctor asks, how long do they live for? And Rogue responds, Cholder? They have a lifespan of 600 years. To which the Doctor says, good. That's a long time to suffer. The Doctor knows that the punishment that he has in mind for the Cholder is harsh, and part of him delights in how harsh it is because they've hurt people and he wants revenge. It really reminded me of the arguably harshly over-the-top punishments that the 10th Doctor inflicted upon the Family of Blood in Series 3. Overall, while the 15th Doctor is putting on a fun and energetic persona, underneath he is still in many ways just as messed up as he's always been. In the scene where he and Rogue fake fight to cause a distraction and Rogue fake proposes, the Doctor's upset reaction seemed genuine to me. Even though the point was to cause drama, he seems genuinely shaken at Rogue's proposal. And that's very in line with how the Doctor simultaneously craves friends but also pushes people away when they get too close. At the end of the episode, Ruby tells off the Doctor for always running to the next thing as a distraction for his loneliness, and he tries to justify it. But in perhaps a show of character growth, the Doctor does take a moment to breathe and puts on the ring that Rogue gave him. Very pointedly not on his ring finger, but he does put the ring on nonetheless. So what did you think of the episode Rogue? Let me know in the comments. The latest episode of Doctor Who, The Legend of Ruby Sunday, had some explosive reveals but left a lot to be discovered. And here is my review and explanation of what happened and some theorizing about what comes next, both spoiler-free and spoilery. So I will give a warning when I'm about to start talking spoilers. As is pretty obvious from the trailers, this episode deals with a mystery that has been teased throughout the season. Why does the same woman keep popping up as different people everywhere the Doctor goes? Aside from the obvious, mysterious, reoccurring woman, it was nice to see a few more familiar faces this episode, such as Rose Noble and the unit crew. I also enjoyed getting to meet child prodigy Morris as played by Lenny Rush. He was a really fun character. I do think it's really funny that the Doctor is actively trying to get to the bottom of the season mystery this time. Previously, when there's been a mystery teased throughout a season helmed by Russell T Davies, the Doctor usually doesn't care about it until he accidentally stumbles right into the answer. Think Bad Wolf in Series 1, Torchwood in Series 2, Harold Saxon in Series 3, and the bees disappearing in Series 4. It's nice to see that the Doctor has apparently learned that if something weird keeps popping up over again, it's probably not a coincidence, it's probably Russell T Davies screwing with him. My biggest criticism of the episode is that there are two main plot threads that seem to me to be disconnected, but the Doctor assumes they're connected without much evidence. This isn't the first time this season where I felt like the shorter episode runtime means that the characters have to make some leaps of logic to keep the story moving forward. And I find myself wishing once again that it all had some more time to breathe. But I'm still very excited to see what will happen in the second part of the finale, The Empire of Death. And I feel like my overall opinion of The Legend of Ruby Sunday will be largely determined by how the next episode pays everything off. I will be talking spoilers past this point, so if you don't want spoilers, hit that favorites button and come back when you've seen this episode. For the rest of you, let's get into it. So that was a lot. Perhaps the biggest takeaway is that the mysterious reoccurring woman who is called Susan Triad in the modern day is actually Sutekh, the god of death. It's a little unclear at this point exactly what Sutekh wants, and it will probably be cleared up in the next part, but right now Sutekh just seems to want to kill everyone. Sutekh has been referenced a few times over the past season as the one who waits, but now he's finally here. And a cloud of Sutekh's manifestation has actually been swirling around the TARDIS for a while, which is why the TARDIS has been groaning all season. Sutekh is a classic Doctor Who villain who fought the fourth Doctor in the serial The Pyramids of Mars. Like the Toymaker, Sutekh has been restyled into a member of the new Pantheon of gods for this era of the show. You can go watch my video about the Pantheon if you want more of an explainer about the Pantheon's history in Doctor Who. But this episode confirmed that a couple of other previous Doctor Who villains, the Trickster and the Mara, are actually part of this modern Pantheon too. Interestingly, Susan Triad didn't seem to know she was Sutekh, which makes me wonder if there's a human woman under all of that who needs saving. The way Sutekh possessed Susan Triad, and indeed the unit employee Harriet Arbinger, reminds me of how the Beast from Series 2 possessed people in The Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit. That's compounded by the fact that Ruby's mum refers to Sutekh as the Beast. While I figure that Susan and Harriet probably just existed to be tools of Sutekh in the end, I can't help but wonder whether Sutekh and the Beast were the same entity all along, kind of like a universal Satan figure who manifests differently in different cultures. Let me know what you think of this theory in the comments below. As for some of the other mysteries in this season, we seem closer to knowing who Ruby's mysterious neighbor Mrs. Flood is. Mrs. Flood, of course, piqued fans' interest when she seemed to know what a TARDIS was in the episode The Church on Ruby Road. In this episode, Ruby and her mum enlist her to take care of Ruby's grandma, Cherry. But Mrs. Flood seems to be doing less taking care of Cherry and more threatening her. The radio also glitched right when Mrs. Flood walked into the Sunday's house, and even though that might have been a sign that Sutekh is almost here, it could have also been caused by Mrs. Flood's proximity. It also left Ruby in Unit's time window, which she and the Doctor unsuccessfully tried to use to see her mother earlier in the episode, but this time Ruby is coming face to face with the hooded figure who left her at the church. Personally, I think the next episode might start with a fake out where we still don't see who the hooded figure is, but I still think there's a good chance we could find out who Ruby's parents are in the next episode. I'm in two minds about whether the Doctor's granddaughter Susan could still factor into all of this, given that the episode made such a big deal about the Doctor thinking that Susan Triad might be his Susan. On the one hand, it was a pretty great red herring, and it makes sense that Sutekh would try to lure the Doctor into his trap by making the Doctor think that Susan had come back. On the other hand, I'm not sure it would be emphasized this much if Susan wasn't going to come back one way or another. Mrs. Flood does seem to be at least partly associated with Sutekh, given that she commented on Sutekh's arrival. But even though she seems to be evil, I guess she could still be Susan. It would be pretty interesting if the Doctor comes face to face with his granddaughter after thousands of years only to find that she's evil. That would be devastating. I'm also not totally convinced that Mrs. Flood's lines actually indicate she was in league with Sutekh, so it's possible she isn't evil after all and she just needs better people skills and to stop saying ominous things. Vote in the comments, is Mrs. Flood evil or is she just socially awkward? Speaking of the Doctor's family, I found it interesting that he seems to tell Kate that his children are in his future and not in his past. I'm not sure I super like that, given the Doctor has mentioned being a parent before, and I would assume the Doctor wouldn't identify as a parent if they hadn't had children yet in their timeline. It remains to be seen whether the show will do something interesting with that or if it will just be a timey-wimey throwaway line. Unless it was the Doctor who dropped Ruby off at the church and the Doctor is actually Ruby's parent and just doesn't know it yet. This is probably my most out there theory, but let me know what you think of it in the comments. And finally, a little thing I thought was cute was the Doctor asking Rose Noble how her uncle is. As we know from the episode The Giggle, the 14th Doctor is basically doing Time Lord rehab by staying and relaxing with Donna's family, and he's styling himself as Donna's brother, making him Rose's uncle. But basically the 15th Doctor was asking how his past self is doing. Okay, that was a lot, and my brain is buzzing with possibilities about what could be in store in the Empire of Death next week. So I want all your theories, reactions, and opinions in the comments. Give them to me, let's discuss. The latest Doctor Who episode, Empire of Death, has elicited some pretty polarizing reactions from fans. And here is my review and an explanation of what went down, both spoiler-free and spoilery. So I will give a warning when I'm about to start talking spoilers. And I won't be spoiling anything from the first part of the finale, The Legend of Ruby Sunday, without a warning either. So people's feelings on this finale appear to be a bit mixed, but in my opinion, I thought it was kind of bloody brilliant. Mercifully, this episode clocks in at about 56 minutes, 10 minutes longer than most of the episodes of this season. So even though it was jam-packed, I didn't feel like it was as overstuffed as some of the episodes this season have been. There was tons of heart in this episode, and it featured some great character work for the Doctor and an emotional payoff to his companion Ruby Sunday's journey. While I felt like the plot was wrapped up pretty nicely, there were some interesting little nuggets that I think could be spun into some fascinating stories for next season. Over my years of watching Doctor Who, I've generally developed the opinion that finale episodes written by the showrunner Russell T Davies tend to have the same strengths and flaws. He's not afraid to get bonkers and bombastic with it, and you can always count on some really gut-wrenching payoffs for characters' arcs. But he does have a tendency to make everything so bonkers that the ending can feel like a bit of a deus ex machina. Who could forget when he made the 10th Doctor into Space Jesus by using the power of thought in the finale for Series 3? However, even though Empire of Death didn't totally avoid those pitfalls, it is by far not the messiest finale written by RTD. And for the most part, I had a fantastic time. My main criticism of this episode is I felt one of the reveals in particular was not as well explained as it could have been. Like, I can come up with some ideas for how it could work, but it isn't explained in the episode very well at all. More on that in the spoiler section. Overall, this was a worthy way of wrapping up the season, and I'm super excited to see what's next for the Doctor. Now I'm going to start talking spoilers about Empire of Death, so if you don't want spoilers, hit that favorites button and come back when you've seen the episode. There was a lot that happened in this story, so let's start with an explanation of what went down. As you may recall, we left off the last episode with Sutekh, the God of Death, having returned and hijacked the TARDIS, and he is now threatening to annihilate the entire universe. Turns out, when the 4th Doctor thought he defeated Sutekh way back in the classic episode Pyramids of Mars, Sutekh actually didn't get banished into the time vortex. Instead, he clung to the TARDIS and has secretly been traveling along with the Doctor ever since. And everywhere the Doctor landed, Sutekh dropped a woman to be his angel of death when the time came to strike. Whenever the Doctor visited a place multiple times, such as Earth, the woman would be reborn again as someone more powerful. Which is how come in 2024 she's a powerful tech mogul, Susan Triad. During his travels in the TARDIS, Sutekh learned all about the Doctor, including about his granddaughter Susan, who the Doctor abandoned and he now presumes is dead. So when the time came for Sutekh to strike, he engineered a trap to make the Doctor think Susan had come back. But it was actually Susan Triad, Sutekh's angel of death. Sutekh begins spewing his deadly dust, killing Kate Stewart, Ruby's foster mum, and indeed everyone in London. The Doctor and his former companion Mel race to Unit's time window, where Ruby Sunday is still trying desperately to work out who left her at the church as a baby. Sutekh and the TARDIS materialize in front of them, but Sutekh refuses to kill them just yet. It turns out that when the Doctor originally went back to see Ruby being left at the church, Sutekh was of course still attached to the TARDIS. And for some reason, Sutekh couldn't see Ruby's mum. She was shrouded from him in a way that no one else in time and space ever had been. So now Sutekh is desperate to find out who Ruby's mum is too, and he's keeping the Doctor, Mel, and Ruby alive until they can find out for him. Still, they've got to get out of there, and luckily there is still a version of the TARDIS in the time window that Ruby is trying to see through. Ruby uses the power of her memory to pull the TARDIS through the time window into existence in the present day. But it's not one of the TARDISes the Doctor has ever travelled in, it's a memory TARDIS made of bits and pieces of every TARDIS to ever exist. The memory TARDIS has actually appeared in the Whoniverse before, in the mini-series Tales of the TARDIS. Basically, Tales of the TARDIS is a series of remastered and updated episodes from the classic era of the show, and the episodes are bookended by some of the old Doctors and companions coming back to talk about their adventures in character. The setting for these bookends is the memory TARDIS, a manifestation of the TARDIS that feeds off of remembrances and stories. And now the memory TARDIS is a thing in the main show too. So the Doctor and his companions escape in the memory TARDIS, taking a piece of the time window with them, just in time to watch every planet the Doctor has ever landed on get killed by the angels of death that Sutekh left there. And because the death wave is so contagious, even all the other planets that the Doctor hasn't visited get get killed off too. The Doctor, of course, blames himself for all of this because this man is nothing if not self-loathing. The Doctor thinks that finding the identity of Ruby's mother may hold the key to defeating Sutekh, so he uses the piece of the time window and Ruby's memories to get a hint. And the time window shows them Roger ap Gwilliam, the worst Prime Minister in Britain's history, talking about his plans for a DNA registry. You may remember in the episode 73 Yards, Ruby defeated Roger ap Gwilliam in an alternate timeline, and her memories of that timeline are still repressed deep inside. I also love that we learn in this episode that the TARDIS's cloaking shield extends for 73 yards, which is a little hint about what exactly happened in that episode. We don't get a full explanation, and I'm pretty glad for that because I think part of the fun of 73 Yards is that it isn't fully explained. But I like the touch all the same. So they arrive in a desolate version of 2046, and they break into the DNA registry to see if they can find anyone who's a match for Ruby. But Mel is being influenced by Sutekh to bring the information about Ruby's mum to him. When the Doctor realizes that Mel is being controlled by Sutekh, he and Ruby hatch a plan. They bring the information from the DNA registry about Ruby's mum to Sutekh, but when Ruby approaches Sutekh to give him the information, she clips an indestructible rope to him that they found in the memory TARDIS. And the Doctor hijacks the TARDIS back from Sutekh using a whistle that he found in the memory TARDIS. The Doctor drags Sutekh into the vortex using the TARDIS, and they go on a tour of time and space. Sutekh is the god of death, but because everything is currently dead, Sutekh's presence cancels it all out, killing death itself. Once everything has been resurrected, the Doctor realizes that he's going to have to kill Sutekh to prevent him from restarting his evil plan. As someone with a strong principle of non-violence, the Doctor is upset at this, knowing that defeating Sutekh will also defeat his own moral principles. I always love the cognitive dissonance when the Doctor has to do something against his perception of himself, because the Doctor has never been as benevolent or non-violent as he pretends to be, and in moments like this, the darkness inside peeks through, much to his distress. So Sutekh is defeated, and all of the people and worlds that died because of him are alive again. This action also resurrects Susan Triad, who is indeed a normal human being with her own life and memories, even though she was placed there by Sutekh. So Kate Stewart, of course, offers her a job at UNIT. The UNIT crew managed to find Ruby's mum through DNA testing, presumably using the extra information that the Doctor and Ruby brought back from 2046. And they discover that her mum was Louise Miller, a totally normal woman who had Ruby when she was 15. Louise lived in an abusive household, and she dropped Ruby off at the church in hopes of giving her a better life. Ruby reconnects with her birth mum and introduces her to her foster mum and grandma. She also manages to track down her dad, who was 15 when Ruby was born and didn't even know he had a child with Louise. Seeing that Ruby is happy with her family, the Doctor leaves for now, promising to be back to visit. He thanks Ruby for helping him open up about his family in a way that he never used to. Despite this character development, the Doctor hasn't totally changed his ways. When Ruby says she loves him, he doesn't reply. That wouldn't be the first time. And after Ruby leaves the TARDIS, we leave the Doctor in quiet sadness. I believe this is because the Doctor knows he can never reconcile with his own family in the way that Ruby has. And because even though he believes it's best for Ruby to spend time with her family now, he's really going to miss her. Ruby has family who will be there for her no matter what, but the Doctor has nobody. And the final scene shows Ruby's mysterious neighbor Mrs. Flood standing on top of Ruby's house talking ominously about what's next for the Doctor. Personally, I don't think it's a stretch to theorize that she is in fact one of the gods in the Doctor's new pantheon of enemies. Based on her dialogue, I'd bet anything she's the god of stories. And maybe she's been lurking around Ruby's house because she loves a good mystery and plot twists. It would also explain how come she breaks the fourth wall so much. So why was this episode so controversial? I think a lot of the pushback to this episode comes from the fact that people don't like that Ruby's parents were totally normal people. I think it's really funny that Russell T Davies said he wrote this storyline because of a peeve he has with the Star Wars sequel trilogy. In case you haven't seen it, that trilogy involves the mystery of the protagonist Rey's birth parents. And in the second film, The Last Jedi, Rey's parents are revealed to be nobodies. She's just a child who happened to be force sensitive and rose to greatness through her own struggle. But then in the next movie, The Rise of Skywalker, it's revealed that Rey actually isn't nobody, she's the granddaughter of the Emperor Palpatine. Fans were split about which version of Rey's backstory they preferred, but clearly Russell T Davies preferred The Last Jedi version because that's what he gave to Ruby. Now, I like The Last Jedi more than a lot of people do, but I understand why some people aren't on board with the idea of Ruby's parents being nobody special. After all, their identity has been teased all season. However, I would argue that them being regular people is perfectly in line with a running theme that Doctor Who has had for years, the importance of regular people. I think this ethos is perfectly summed up by one of my favourite lines from the show from the 2010 Christmas special. In 900 years of time and space, I've never met anyone who wasn't important before. However, my one big issue with this solution is that I don't think it adequately explains why Sutekh couldn't see Louise when she came to drop Ruby off at the church. This is basically all the explanation we get. She was important because we think she's important. That's how everything happens, every war, every religion, every love story. We invest things with significance. So while the whole of creation was turning around her, it made her sheer existence more powerful than Time Lords and gods. In the end, the most important person in the universe was the most ordinary. Which is all well and good, but it doesn't tell us why Ruby attaching so much significance to her mum's identity would shield her like that. If that one thing had been ironed out, I think this would be an absolutely smashing finale for me. As it stands though, I really liked it. Be sure to leave your thoughts about Empire of Death and the season as a whole in the comments. The latest season of Doctor Who has been out for a few weeks now, and now that my opinions have had some time to settle, I feel ready to give my episode ranking. This will be relatively spoiler-free, so if you haven't seen the season yet, rest assured that I won't ruin any of the major reveals. I will also be including the Christmas special, The Church on Ruby Road, as part of my ranking because I think it counts as a de facto part of the season. In 9th place, I put Episode 1, Space Babies. It functions pretty well as Ruby Sunday's introduction to traveling with the Doctor, but I couldn't get over how extremely silly it was. I don't actually mind silly Doctor Who, I'm one of those weirdos who loves New Earth, but I think the tone of Space Babies takes itself too seriously for the amount of silliness in the episode. And that's a shame because the set and effects are really cool. Except for the baby's mouth movements, that was really uncanny valley. Next up, at number 8, I put Episode 7, The Legend of Ruby Sunday. This was mainly a setup for the finale episode, so it was never really going to be able to shine as a story in its own right. I feel a bit bad for ranking it so low, but there's so little payoff to things in the episode itself that I can't really justify putting it any higher. The villain reveal at the end is pretty great though. Next up at number 7, I put the Christmas special, The Church on Ruby Road. This is a pretty enjoyable episode and it's a great introduction to the Doctor and Ruby's characters. But the pacing was a bit wonky, and in retrospect the fantasy elements and the spontaneous musical number feel a bit out of place for what the series ended up being. For similar reasons, at number 6 I put Episode 2, The Devil's Chord. Super enjoyable story, super amazing villain, but the meta elements ended up making it feel out of place compared to the rest of the season. Next up at number 5, I put the finale, The Empire of Death. I actually like this episode better than a lot of people do, and it was a pretty thrilling conclusion to the season. But there's one major plot element that wasn't explained properly at all, and that bumps it down the list for me. I also can't help feeling like the villain was defeated a bit too easily, despite the fact that they were supposed to be the most powerful thing the Doctor had faced all season. At number 4, I put Episode 6, Rogue. While this episode had the same issue as a lot of other episodes in this season, namely that the pacing was very fast and I kind of wanted it to have an extra 10 minutes of runtime to let the story breathe, it was just really damn fun. There was some incredible character work for the Doctor in this episode, and I loved his romantic chemistry with the mysterious Rogue. Next up, in 3rd place, I put Episode 5, Dot and Bubble. This was very Black Mirror-esque, it looks spectacular, and it's nothing short of chilling. But again, I felt like it needed an extra 10 minutes or so to properly explain some important plot points. In 2nd place, I put Episode 3, Boom. After the silliness of Space Babies and the weird meta nature of the Devil's Chord, this felt like a return to the typical Doctor Who format I know and love. The tension was so stressful in the best possible way, and the Doctor and Ruby had some great conflict when their relationship is usually very uncomplicated and friendly. And I love the way the episode tackled complicated subjects like faith, AI, and the military-industrial complex. My only qualms were that a couple of plot threads made the episode feel a bit cluttered at times, and the ending was a bit of a deus ex machina. But I loved everything else about it so much that it has earned its place near the top of the list. But not quite at the very top, because the number 1 spot goes to Episode 4, 73 Yards. This episode has gone down as one of my favourite stories of Doctor Who, period. It didn't bother me that not everything in this episode is fully explained because I think the mystery was kind of the point, but in my review of the episode I did detail my theory that I think explains a good chunk of what happened. Sometimes it's annoying when episodes leave a lot to be explained and leave the audience to fill in the gaps with their theories, but not so with this one. I think it worked beautifully. So what do you think of my episode ranking? Do you mostly agree, or did I make you gasp in horror a few times? Let me know in the comments. Here's my review of the 2024 Doctor Who Christmas special Joy to the World, both spoiler-free and spoilery, so I will give a warning when I'm about to start talking spoilers. Joy to the World is about the Doctor's adventures in the Time Hotel, where each room leads to a different moment in history. But an evil plot is afoot, and the Doctor must hop through the rooms of the Time Hotel to stop it. This was the 2nd episode this year to be written by former Doctor Who showrunner Stephen Moffat, and the concept definitely feels very Moffat-y. I typically dig the wibbly-wobbly timey-wimey nature of a lot of
Moffat's plots. And even though I have some major criticisms of the way this story was structured, which I'll get to in the spoiler section, I really liked the concept itself. Ncuti Gatwa as the Doctor was a delight as always, and it was great to see him grappling with his loneliness after parting ways with his most recent companion. I was really excited to see Nicola Coughlan of Bridgerton fame guest starring in this episode. However, while her character Joy was super fun, I feel like we didn't get to know enough about her. There were a couple of other side characters, Anita and Trev, who were also absolutely lovely, but I couldn't help feeling like their screen time might have been better used for the actual main guest star in this episode. Overall, even though this episode had promise and some lovely performances, and even though the ending actually made me shed a tear, I feel like there were some massive plot issues that stopped me from enjoying it as much as I could have. And now I'm going to explain why by getting into some spoilers, so if you haven't seen this episode and you don't want to be spoiled, save this video and come back later. For the rest of us, let's get into it. Broadly speaking, I had three main issues with this episode. First of all, while I thought the sequence with the Doctor staying at the Sandringham for a year and helping out the hotel receptionist Anita was really lovely, it felt tonally inconsistent with the rest of the episode, especially when this sequence came relatively early in the episode runtime. Now, I do tend to get thrown off by time skips quite easily, and it's one of the reasons why I don't vibe with the 2013 Christmas special The Time of the Doctor as much as a lot of other people do, but I feel like if that year-long montage with the Doctor and Anita had been cut or reduced, it would have helped resolve my second criticism, which is, as I referenced in the spoiler-free section, that we didn't have enough time with Joy. The main thing we learn about Joy is that her mother died on Christmas Day 2020, and Joy wasn't able to go see her because of the lockdowns. And Joy carries a deep sense of grief around Christmas because of that. That's a fine backstory to base a character around, but I wanted to know a bit more about her so that her sort of death at the end of the episode would hit me harder emotionally. Which now brings me to my third criticism, and the one that I think frustrates me the most. So the evil plot in this episode is that the corporation Vilengard wants to create their own custom star to use as a power source. And they hijacked the bodies of unwitting life forms, including Joy, to make sure that their starseed ended up in the right place at the right time so that it could detonate. Unfortunately, a star being created like that would destroy the Earth, so the Doctor is desperate to find the briefcase that contains the starseed and transport it somewhere where it can't hurt anyone. But when the starseed does go off, it's not the Doctor who saves the day, but Joy and the other people whose consciousnesses were also uploaded to the Vilengard interface. These people use the fact that they're part of the interface to make the starseed shoot into the heavens and bloom at a safe distance from Earth. In the first instance, the astronomy nerd part of me is annoyed at this because there's no way that the star could have possibly reached a safe distance from Earth in such a short span of time, even if it was traveling at the speed of light. But the part of me that just wants a good story is also annoyed because this means the Doctor didn't even need to do anything. All that rushing around and daring do was completely unnecessary because the people who were part of the Vilengard interface took care of saving the world themselves. Stephen Moffat actually wrote another recent episode of Doctor Who called Boom, where the Vilengard Corporation's evil plot was also foiled by the compassionate choices of an AI who was created from the consciousness of someone they'd killed. It seems like Vilengard has a massive flaw in their own system. In the case of Joy to the World, though, it seems like Vilengard actually got exactly what they wanted. Sure, the star is now in a slightly different place than they'd originally planned, but they can still use its energy to keep doing their evil schemes. It's so frustrating to me because I love the idea of the Doctor fighting a futuristic weapons manufacturer. But Joy to the World took one of the few issues that I had with the episode Boom, that is compassionate AI ex machina, and made it way worse! So close and yet so far, as much as I enjoyed the vibes of this episode and really wanted to love it overall. So what did you think of Joy to the World? Let me know in the comments. And now it's onwards to the future, with the TARDIS coming back very soon to take us all on some new adventures. Be sure to let me know in the comments what you're hoping to see in the next season of Doctor Who. Remember to subscribe to my channel for more Doctor Who opinions and analysis, and check out my monthly newsletter if you're interested in getting early access to all of my videos. The link to that is in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.